Hello and welcome back, everyone. We begin our next to last chapter of the course. We are nearing the end. I trust that at least some of you are realizing that geography is a pretty cool subject. And as I've said a couple times, it encompasses so much of the social sciences, probably all of them. And I like to think of it as king when it comes to the social sciences. We come home this week, right? We've been girdling the globe, and we come home this week. But we're going to be spending time as we get home. We're going to be spending some time with the neighbors, right? And who we really never got to know. And I'm speaking, of course, of Canada. I always felt that the Canadian politics and history has been kind of enigmatic, I guess, if you will, to the average American. And in fact, when the calendar allows, and it's happened a couple of times over the years of my career, when the calendar allows, I have been known to split these chapters up, as a matter of fact, but this was not one of those years. So on that note, you can turn to page 529 or 528, and we will do what we always do and jump around to the various maps. And anyone who has spent at least a dime on this book can certainly say that we use them, right? Or I talked to surprisingly more than a few students who tell me that they get books and they pay for these books, and I don't want to rub it in to you folks how expensive they are, but I hear that we never use them, so can't say that here, right? So let's take a look at where we're going to be heading here. And chapter 12, North America. Let's take a look at the heads up terms here. And we have the First Nations. First Nations, going to be talking about them a lot. You will know who they are and some of their issues by the end of this, by the end of the week. First Nations, these are your Native Americans of Canada, right? Your Native Americans, your Indigenous peoples. The Quebec Act, the British granted limited rights to the French and some territory along with that. Modern day province of Quebec will develop that a little bit more, obviously, of how that all came about. The BNA, the British North American Act, that Canada gained their independence, 1867, from the British in a peaceful manner, right? The UN Security Council. We talk about the UN Security Council. You hear about them from time to time on current events and so forth. And probably the most powerful arm of the United Nations. They are to maintain international peace and security. The Northeast Corridor, this is the area from Boston down to Washington, D.C. Okay, the Northeast Corridor. The Francophones, these are French-speaking Canadians, specifically in Quebec, otherwise known as Quebecois, French-speaking Quebecois. Appalachia is an area that stretches from the Atlantic provinces of Canada on down through northern Georgia, Alabama. It stretches through, and I know a lot of you folks in go to Mount Aloysius are in the Altoona area and maybe east of that. I don't know if the Appalachians stretch quite through that. I know where I am down in Somerset. This is definitely considered Appalachia here, the northern Appalachian Mountains. Nunavut means our land. We will take a look at that on the Canadian map, Canadian political and geographic maps. That is the newest of the Canadian provinces, made up of about 35,000 people. It's huge, goes up into the Arctic Circle. Has about 35 to 38,000 people in it. 90% of that's Inuit Indians, the Inuit Indians. So objectives here for this chapter. I want to recognize the world roles of the United States and Canada. We want to examine the subregions of the US and Canada, become aware of Canada's emergence, and simulate the various ethnic tensions experienced by the average Canadian, and assess the blessings of the US standard of living. Okay, so let me see if I can get here we go. Visual's not up there. Okay, turn to page 528. Turn to page 528. And as you're doing that, I'll just set up the opening segment here and say that the United States of America and Canada are two of the largest countries in the world, right? Canada ranks second in size, the United States fourth. However, when it comes to population, the Canadians are nowhere near the top, and the United States is third, although population-wise considerably smaller than China and India, who are ahead of us, right, in that regard. Both Canada and the United States are predominantly urban, highly productive, and very affluent. Settlement of the region by Native Americans, First Nations in Canada, began over, well, a long time ago. I don't like to get into dates, right? I think we've been here a lot longer than some people think we have been, and maybe not quite as much as some others, but that's immaterial to me. Contemporary North America has been most profoundly influenced, however, by Europeans, right, who settled between 1500 AD and 1900. Turn to page 572. I'll start taking a look at settlement patterns. Canadian changes were slower than those in the United States. The French were the first settlers. They were big fur trappers. British loyalists were either forced out or they voluntarily emigrated to the Atlantic provinces or the northwest shores of Lake Ontario. And we're talking Toronto. The Toronto area. Hostility from the French dictated those settlement patterns. The emergence of Canada. The emergence of Canada. You have your first set of notes to write there. The and I just want to remind you, I know I said this at the top of the at the beginning of the course, but you know, with the lectures, it's probably good just a reminder, it's good educational practice, or it's good education to probably listen to me say it first and then write it out, or write it out and then you know, play the tape and hear me say it. So you're kinesthetically doing it and also, you know, auditorially hearing me. So the 7 Years' War / French and Indian War. 7 Years' War was kind of the global term for the friction between the British and the French, which was ongoing, right? Balance of power around the globe seemed to, right at that time, shake out to those two. Here in North America, it was the French and Indian War, which even, you know, spilled over into, you know, the US as well, right? The British were victorious. The British were victorious over the French. The Quebec Act extended Quebec's territory and granted limited rights to the French. So the victors gained the spoil, the British, and they did allow some limited sovereignty for the French, instead of kicking them completely off the continent. British North Americans wanted more independence, though, as time went on. That, coupled with the fact that the mercantile system was getting expensive for the British. The British are over across the Atlantic, 3,000 miles. Their relations were getting strained with Americans, causing the British to give British North America its independence. So the nation gained responsibility in 1867 as it became its own dominion with the British North America Act, or the BNA, as Canadians know it as. Therefore, an independent Canada, ta-da, is born. Let's take a look here briefly at the climate maps and so forth briefly, and then we'll move on to world roles. Turn to page 530, pardon me, and you have the climate map. And North America, as you can see there, has a vast and diverse resource base, which has enabled Canada and the US to develop the world's leading agricultural and manufacturing sectors. And nearly all of the world's climates are found in North America, with a majority of the region dominated by mid-latitude climates. Turn back to page 528, and I want you to see a geographical map now. And the western third of Canada and the United States, you can see that is fairly mountainous, with some active volcanoes in the Cascades and southwestern Alaska. The Canadian Shield, you can see that on your map, and interior lowlands dominate between the Rocky Mountains and the Appalachian Mountains, as you can see fairly clearly there on the map as well. And as I said, the Appalachian Mountains, they extend from northern Georgia into the Atlantic provinces of Canada, New Brunswick, and so forth. Major river systems and the Great Lakes, right? Pretty obvious there, play an important role in defining both physical and human geographies of the region. The Mississippi, Missouri, Ohio system not only drains nearly 1/3 of the continent, it also serves as an important transportation network for the movement of goods and people. So the region experiences a wide range of natural hazards too, including hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, volcanoes, and floods. Page 534 gives you an aerial shots of some areas where there are flood hazards in the Mississippi River area. So let's go to world roles for each of these nations. And the United States and the United Nations, the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council there, your first blank, is the most powerful branch of the United Nations. Its purpose is to maintain international peace and security. There are 5 countries that are granted seats, and they are the United States, France, China, England, or the United Kingdom, and Russia. And you can see that that's kind of a recipe for some disagreements, but you can also argue that it provides balance, right? The global role of the regional economy of the United States. After the breakup, the 1991 breakup, dissolving of the Soviet Union, the United States remained the sole superpower. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Amendment, was established in 1988 between the US, Canada, and Mexico. and was added in 1994. Let me go back to that first, the prior point. Your discussion question later on in the week will deal with that issue. What is our responsibility as a superpower, maybe even the lone superpower, and our wealth, our standard of living. How has that affected us? Something to ponder. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. The book, again, was the last publication of this book I really liked, 2015. But since that time, and I'm not slamming anything here, but 2016, the Trump administration came into office, as we know, into 2021. And, there were some alterations to NAFTA under that administration. But the overall arguments are still the same. I say that because I want to say that your reading is not going to be in the textbook, but there is an interesting reading, point and counterpoint reading on NAFTA that if you have time, you might want to check that out. And because there has been some alterations to it since that was written, the scope is still the same. The tenor of NAFTA is still the same. Some alterations, however. U.S. population patterns. U.S. population patterns. Population change and natural growth. U.S. population increase is due in large part to young immigrant communities. This is different from other wealthy and technologically advanced countries. These families have larger families and they have higher birth rates. So when you compare birth rates between the US and Canada, ours is always a little higher. The values on that are the same generally between native born Americans as they are Canadians, but the immigration factor changes those age sex diagrams because of immigration. In fact, page 546, you can check age sex diagrams out for the United States and Canada. Forgot I had that there. So population distribution, increasing urban density. The Northeast corridor, the Eastern Seaboard, right from Washington, D.C. to Boston. You can see on page 548, a map there, inset map there that shows you where that is. And on table 12.2, over on page 540, back on page 547, there's a population figures from the early 2010s, and then projections for 2025 for the major cities in North America. Well, patterns of migration. Let's take a look at patterns of migration in the United States. The latter half of the 1800s, the higher number of immigrants came from Southern Europe, right? Primarily Italy. Immigrant groups often maintain a younger age for the working population, and as I said, higher birth rates. Immigrants respond more to U.S. economics, right? The U.S. economy, than they do laws and legislation. It's just the way it is. Contemporary immigration patterns in the United States. We hear a lot about this. 2000 census, 281 million people were in the United States. 35% were of European descent, European origin. 13% are African American. 13% are African American. 18 to 19% are Hispanic. And that's, and that is an increasing number, right? Hispanic population has grown leaps and bounds. In fact, I was taking a look at we've all seen those red and blue political maps, and Texas has become a concern for Republicans. Democrats have California going blue, New York going blue, Illinois, where Chicago is, going blue, and Pennsylvania, right? Some of your more populous states, Florida, and Florida's kind of purple, I guess. Texas has always been red, but if you take a look at carefully at a political map of Texas, along the border, it's turning blue, right? And Republicans charge that the Democrats have no seeming interest in curbing the border and doing anything about it down there, because in their thinking, there is a long-term game plan to flip Texas blue. And if that happened, right, it would probably be hard for Republicans to ever get the White House again. That's an argument, and I could see that. So, over the long term, as immigrants, legal or whatever, blend into the American fabric, they can turn into voters, right? So just kind of a political side note there. Native Americans, and the United States government, most important source of income there is casino gambling. Which is designed to encourage relations with the wider economy. Internal migration in the United States. The majority of African Americans live in the Southeast. About 55% of African Americans live in that part of the the country. And you can turn to a couple pages here. I'd like you to turn to page 551, gives you a map of U.S. internal migration, and page 550 deals with that a little bit as well. Take a look at page 572, and we'll go to Canada and the United Nations. Canada, their military, the Canadian military, is known for taking leads in peacekeeping missions. We had you guys look at Rwanda a few chapters back. They were there taking the lead in that. Population distribution. Keep your page here, page 572. The vast majority of Canadians are found in a belt across the southern part of the country, nearly parallel to the border, as a matter of fact. Thus, there's a high population densities in those areas. Canadian patterns of ethnic integration. You have a lot of large urban centers there. Preferably Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. Montreal, of course, is in Quebec. Toronto, and in the maps there, you can see the southeastern part of the province, and then Vancouver over in British Columbia along the west coast. And these attract numerous amounts of immigrants. The Canadian government sets up policies that do not segregate by discrimination. Now, there are a couple of geographic terms. One of them is called a centripetal force. Centripetal forces are forces that unite us. And if you take my spring introduction to geography course, we developed that. Centrifugal forces, however, centrifugal forces are not unifying forces, right? These are forces that splinter folks, right? So centrifugal forces in Canada, the challenge of Quebec and the rights of First Nations. Francophones. Francophones are a French-speaking Canadian. It's a French-speaking Canadian, and they have a strong sense of being a separate nation within a larger Canadian political frame. And the Francophone, your average Francophone in Canada, they see a different culture. They see a different culture. They see a different history, and they have a different religion, Roman Catholics. And they make up 21% of the Canadian population. Therefore, there's a Quebec separatist movement, which gained momentum in the 1980s. And perceived oppression from the federal government, coupled with fear of losing their culture and language, unified the PQ. The PQ. The PQ is a political party, otherwise known as the Parti Québécois. The Parti Québécois. And it's a separatist political party whose purpose is to achieve Quebec's independence. Now, back in every so often they have their census there, and if there's referendums in Quebec every time they do that census, and if there's over 50% of Quebecois francophones who opt to leave the country, they can do that. And back in the 2000s, one of the referendums, they got up to 49.5%. And that really shook up the capital in Ottawa. And I play a game with my introduction to geography class, where if you take, because we developed this in another way, if you take Quebec, if you look at the map of Canada and take Quebec out of Canada, there's a gaping hole between the Atlantic provinces and the rest of the country, right? And I'm going to get into this too in a minute. There's a lot of unemployment problems out on the Atlantic provinces at pretty much around, around through the calendar year. And and of course, Quebec's a big banking center too. Montreal is. And so that really scared the capital, scared the politicians in Ottawa. And so a lot of laws are crafted that a lot of your English-speaking Canadians get upset with. They feel like there's a lot of placating the Quebecois. A lot of tax dollars go out of the prairie provinces, which are oil-producing provinces like Alberta, to placate, whether they're imagined or real, demands of the Quebecois. So, these are issues that are talked about around dinner tables around Canada, certainly English-speaking Canadians. So you have that issue there, and then you have several groups within Quebec that within the province, they don't really share the same goals for separation. That's because they're English-speaking. They're business owners who fear loss of business, and recent immigrants who wish to reside in Canada, right? Who are in Quebec. So they don't share the same sentiments. And then there are the First Nations, right? You have several treaties in the 1800s that promised land to the First Nations that have yet to be resolved. One of your video clips will speak of one of those that's on the verge of being resolved up in Saskatchewan. Page 553 is a visual of all the different land claims and land disputes. So there are a lot of problems with the Canadian government and the First Nations. I remember back in 2010, the Winter Olympics, Summer Olympics, we're in Vancouver. It was 2010, and the First Nations wanted to get the attention of Ottawa about, to renew talks on some of these land claims, these land issues. So they were promising to go to Vancouver in front of the world, in front of the cameras, and raise a lot of cane if there wasn't movement on talks. So another issue in Canada. Lastly, here I want to get into the regions of U.S. and Canada. And despite its affluence, the United States has many pockets of poverty. And the gap between a materially wealthy and materially poor is increasing. Much of the poverty is concentrated in inner city areas that also contain high proportions of African Americans or Hispanics. The U.S. is comprised of 10 geographers different on things, different about things. I know your authors here have 10 subregions. I include an 11th one. And each have distinct physical, economic, and cultural geographies. Turn to page 560 in your textbook, and we'll start to take a look at these regions. The first one will be New England. New England. Your second, and turn to page 561 for this one, the megalopolis or the Northeast Corridor. When I was doing my heads up terms, I had the Northeast Corridor there, and I had a brain lock. I was thinking, what's the other word for that we use? I mean, I only wrote it down 1,000 times. It's megalopolis, which some of you have heard of, page 561. You can keep the page there at 561 because I want to mention Appalachia, or the manufacturing belt. I want to mention the manufacturing belt. You can see that on page 561. And that's your industrial belt, right? From Chicago through Detroit, the car making capital, at least used to be, to steel makers in Cleveland and Pittsburgh nearby us, right? Steel making towns of Pittsburgh. And these geographers here actually bend that area all the way up to even up into Boston. I necessarily do not, but I could see their point. Appalachia, right? Appalachia, you could see on your map on page 563 and 561, 563 for certain. Appalachia is Eastern Kentucky, the heart of Appalachia, the poorest parts of it is what I'm honing in on here. Eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, Western Virginia, the state of Virginia, East Tennessee. This is Central Appalachia. And again, this is one of the poorest areas, if not the poorest in the United States. I mean, coal mining is still important there, but that's kind of spotty. The U.S. heartland. The U.S. heartland. This is the Midwest and the Great Plains areas. The term Midwest is applied to 8 states of the Corn Belt. And you can see that on page 563 as well. The Great Lakes area, cities such as Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and Cincinnati are among the world's most productive farming and farming hubs of agribusiness. So Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, right? They can overlap with the manufacturing region and Great Lakes area. The South. Rural areas in the South remain the poorest of the South. For instance, going back to page 561, you can see the Mississippi Delta area. Major cotton producers. They were up to the 1900s. And of course, after the Civil War, that all kind of kind of diminished. Yeah, megalopolis, that was page 561. Page 560 for, oh, you can see a lot of this too, the Appalachia area, the South, the Mississippi Delta, and for the America's heartland, the agricultural regions, page 563. I want to make sure I had the right page numbers there. And then, yeah, the upper Mississippi River Valley from Louisiana and up through Arkansas and southeastern Missouri would be considered the South as well. Then you have your western mountains, your Rocky Mountain region. You can see there as well. Takes up a large swath of territory. I'm sure you will agree. Now, your authors do not have this. When I have my introduction to geography class, study the regions, I include this in there. And this is the Southwest. And I consider that, I consider West Texas, I could say actually Texas, more Southwestern culture than Southern culture. So, but I include that all the way over to the very southern part of Southern California through, of course, New Mexico and Southern New Mexico and Southern Arizona and over into the San Diego County area. Then you got your Pacific Coast, right, from Puget Sound to San Diego. And that has become the second national core, second in economic importance to the Northeast Corridor. You have, you know, Silicon Valley, you have the Seattle area, right, Seattle tech area. And of course, California, the state is, you know, the 7th, 8th leading largest economy in the world. And then you have Alaska and Hawaii rounding it out. From page 572, I'm going to put a wrap on this, the regions of Canada. Page 572. And we're going from right to left, right? We're going from the Atlantic Ocean over. You have your, I would just say this too, with your notes, the Canadian provinces, interesting side note here too. Well, not a side note, I want you to know this, but an interesting point. The Canadian provinces, you know, we saw the BNA, the British North American Act, 1867. So pretty much 100 years later, Canada was established after the US, but their provinces, although created about 100 years later than our states, their provinces have greater autonomy from Ottawa, the capital, than our states do from Washington. I mean, we have that federalist system, right? That's kind of supposedly split responsibilities between state and federal government at 50-50. The provinces of Canada have more freedom, certainly do. We're going from east to west here. The Atlantic provinces, I mentioned them earlier. These guys are the principal recipients of federal aid. A lot of unemployment out there. You know, the fishing is one of the major jobs out there, but it's seasonal and it's contingent on available stocks. There are oil rigs out there, and people do find jobs working in the oil rigs. But again, you know, if Quebec is ever decides to leave the country, that's going to separate the Atlantic provinces from the political nerve center in Ottawa and the rest of the country. Quebec, right? Quebec, the next province over from the Atlantic provinces, settled shortly after the first French settlement, developed the long lot settlement designed to maximize land ownership along the St. Lawrence River. If you take a look at the southeast corner of Quebec, you can see the St. Lawrence River. Ontario, the center of British control. Toronto is Canada's biggest city. And province is also the political center of the country. It's where the capital of Ottawa is stationed. You can see that they are kind of bordering Quebec. in Northern Ontario. The prairie provinces, you should probably jot this down next to that. Prairie provinces are Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Alberta is of specific importance because it is the oil producing region, and it arguably produces a large swath of money for the Canadian economy, a lot of their oil money. And they feel that is being siphoned out east to feed the big political machine in Ottawa and Quebec and the Atlantic province's problems with unemployment. So there's a small secession movement in Alberta, and it is an option to check that out. How's that going with your in the news options? The Alberta secession movement. Then you have your West Coast, right? You can see that. British Columbia, right? British Columbia predominantly makes up that. And then Northern Canada. Northern Canada, you have Barren Rock from Northern Saskatchewan and British Columbia up through the Yukon and Northwest Territories. And as I said, Nunavut territory, which was carved out in 1999. So you have your graphic organizer. You can look at that, and I would advise recapping via looking at that. And we'll take a look now at what is up ahead. I'm sure there's some important things here as we start to near the finish line. Graphic organizer, right? That's there to recap, gives you all the things I highlighted, breaks it down. Your readings, you got two short ones there. The role of U.S. superpower and standard of living versus quality of life, right? What is the difference? And how does that affect us as Americans, right? That'll be related to one of your discussion questions, as will the role of the U.S. superpower. Then a couple short videos, Quebec nationalism, Yukon's First Nation and claims and self-government, kind of developing those points on the First Nations a little bit more. Saskatchewan, their First Nation, set to receive a land claim from the federal government. So maybe some action there, right, on that front. Comprehension, analysis, practice, activity. I think I have you guys taking items pegged at a quiz. And if you wanted to practice with that, doing some work on that, and trying to think, maybe it's not creating a true false question, but there's a practice activity for you guys pegged to that. I know it's pegged to the quiz. In the news, Thursday night, discussion post Friday, responses on Sunday night. We will quiz and then begin our last chapter. Chapter 13 is kind of a bookend, a wrap-up chapter, kind of a bookend to chapter 1. And then your items for your final sheet, right? That is, you can get that on the chapter 11 module. And yeah, that's it, right? So any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to contact me. Thursday night, if you want to get in touch with me, you need to talk about things, and you want me to, see how you're doing on practice activities, and let me know, and we'll schedule a time to do that. So there you have it, another wrap on another week. And, so I will see you guys next time. You guys have a great week, and get ready to finish up strong. Okay, bye.